The Elaine Massacre of 1919 stands as one of the bloodiest and most egregious episodes of racial violence in American history. Occurring in the small town of Elaine, Arkansas, this event unfolded in the broader context of post-World War I racial tensions, economic struggles, and a rising black resistance to systemic oppression. This massacre is both a testimony to the violent enforcement of white supremacy in the early 20th century and a profound reminder of the courage of African Americans in their struggle for justice and equality. The massacre took place during the Red Summer of 1919, a period marked by widespread racial violence across the United States. African Americans who had migrated to urban centers in the North and South during the Great Migration found themselves at the forefront of social, political, and economic transformations that provoked hostility from white communities. The conclusion of World War I exacerbated these tensions, as returning black veterans, inspired by their service overseas, demanded the rights and freedoms promised to them. This period saw African Americans organizing for better wages, fair working conditions, and civil rights, efforts that were often met with violent resistance from whites who sought to maintain racial hierarchies. In Elaine, the seeds of the massacre were sown in the context of the oppressive sharecropping system that dominated the Arkansas Delta. African American farmers, the majority of whom were sharecroppers, toiled under exploitative arrangements that kept them in a cycle of poverty and debt. Sharecropping, a system that evolved after the abolition of slavery, allowed white landowners to maintain economic control over black laborers. These arrangements often involved deceitful accounting practices, with landowners frequently underpaying or outright cheating sharecroppers out of their rightful earnings. Amid these injustices, African Americans in Elaine began to mobilize for economic and social justice. One of the most significant efforts was the formation of the Progressive Farmers and Household Union of America, an organization that sought to secure fair payment for black sharecroppers and hold white landowners accountable. The union represented a bold assertion of black agency in a region where white supremacy reigned unchecked. Its members met secretly to discuss their grievances and plan collective actions, an act that, in the eyes of local whites, was an intolerable challenge to the existing racial order. On the evening of September 30th, 1919, members of the Progressive Farmers and Household Union gathered at a church in Hoop Spur, a rural community near Elaine. The purpose of the meeting was to discuss strategies for securing legal representation to fight for fair compensation from white landowners. As the meeting progressed, a group of white men, including law enforcement officers, arrived near the church, reportedly with the intent to disrupt the gathering. A confrontation ensued, and shots were fired. One white man was killed, and another was injured. This incident served as the spark for the massacre that followed. The killing of a white man in a racially charged environment set off a chain reaction of violence. Local newspapers and white authorities quickly framed the incident as an uprising of armed black radicals, stoking fear and outrage among the white population. Rumors spread of a massive black insurrection, with claims that African Americans were planning to kill whites and seize control of the area. These baseless accusations ignited a wave of mob violence that engulfed Elaine and its surrounding communities. White mobs, bolstered by local law enforcement and vigilante groups, descended upon African American communities in the area. Over the course of several days, these mobs hunted down black men, women, and children, killing indiscriminately and burning homes and churches to the ground. Eyewitness accounts describe scenes of utter brutality, with black residents being lynched, shot, and tortured. The exact death toll remains uncertain, but estimates suggest that hundreds of African Americans were killed during the massacre, making it one of the deadliest episodes of racial violence in U.S. history. The response of state and federal authorities to the violence in Elaine was equally troubling. Rather than seeking to protect African American residents, the Arkansas governor called in federal troops to restore order. These troops, consisting of nearly 500 soldiers from Camp Pike, arrived in Elaine with orders to disarm all black residents and suppress any perceived insurrection. Instead of de-escalating the situation, the arrival of federal troops exacerbated the violence. Many black residents who surrendered their weapons were subsequently arrested or killed, and the soldiers reportedly joined white mobs in attacking African Americans. In the aftermath of the massacre, the legal system further compounded the injustice. Dozens of African Americans were arrested and charged with crimes related to the so-called insurrection. 12 black men were hastily tried and convicted of murder, with all of them receiving death sentences. These trials were marred by blatant racial prejudice, with all-white juries delivering swift and predictable verdicts. The accused men, known as the Elaine 12, became symbols of the systemic racism that pervaded the American legal system. The legal battle to save the Elaine 12 from execution became a focal point for civil rights advocates and organizations. The NAACP, led by figures such as Walter White and James Weldon Johnson, took up the case and launched a nationwide campaign to expose the injustices in Elaine. The legal team, which included prominent attorneys such as Scipio Africanus Jones, a black lawyer from Arkansas, and Moorfield Story, a former president of the American Bar Association, fought tirelessly to appeal the convictions. The case ultimately reached the U.S. Supreme Court, which in 1923 issued a landmark decision in Moore v. Dempsey. The court ruled that the convictions of the Elaine 12 were invalid due to the mob-dominated atmosphere in which the trials had taken place. This decision represented a significant victory for the NAACP and set a precedent for federal intervention in cases of racial injustice. However, the ruling did not address the broader issues of racial violence and economic oppression that had led to the massacre. The Elaine Massacre had lasting repercussions for the African American community in Arkansas and beyond. It underscored the extreme lengths to which white supremacists would go to maintain control over black labor and resist challenges to racial hierarchies. The massacre also highlighted the courage and resilience of African Americans who dared to organize and fight for their rights in the face of overwhelming opposition. In the decades that followed, the Elaine Massacre was largely forgotten or misrepresented in historical narratives. Official accounts downplayed the violence and portrayed the events as a necessary response to a black uprising. It was not until the late 20th and early 21st centuries that historians and activists began to uncover the truth about what happened in Elaine. Through the efforts of scholars, descendants of the victims, and organizations dedicated to preserving the memory of the massacre, this dark chapter of American history has been brought to light. The Elaine Massacre is a stark reminder of the violent legacy of racism in the United States and the enduring struggle for racial justice. It challenges us to confront the past honestly and to recognize the ways in which systemic racism continues to shape our society. By remembering the victims and honoring their courage, we affirm our commitment to building a more just and equitable future.